The stars had always been silent. For 300 years, the Karani people had listened to the void between worlds, hoping to hear friendly voices calling back to them. They had built great towers that reached toward the sky, sending messages of peace and friendship into the darkness. But space remained quiet. Now, as their world burned around them, the Karani wished they had never broken that silence. Kayla pressed her face against the cold window of the shelter deep underground. Above them, the surface of Velara was being eaten alive. The Devourers had come 6 months ago, appearing at the edge of their solar system like a black tide. At first, the Karani thought they could reason with them. They always believed problems could be solved with words and understanding. They were wrong. The Devourers did not talk. They did not negotiate. They simply consumed everything in their path. Plants, animals, even the soil itself disappeared into their endless hunger. Cities that had stood for thousands of years became empty wastelands in days. The beautiful blue oceans turned black as the creatures poisoned the water with their waste. "Mama, when can we go home?" asked Mira, Kayla's young daughter. The child's large eyes looked up at her with trust that broke Kayla's heart. "Soon, little star," Kayla lied, stroking the child's soft hair. Very soon, but Kayla knew they would never see their home again. The surface was lost. The underground shelters had food for maybe 2 more weeks. After that, they would all starve in the darkness or worse, be found by the Devourers. Elder Joran stood at the center of the shelter, his old hands shaking as he held the communication device. His voice was tired, defeated. "The message is ready," he announced to the crowd of survivors. "We will send it on all frequencies to every corner of space our transmitters can reach." Kayla joined the hundreds of other Karani gathered around him. They all knew this was their last hope. If no one answered their call for help, they would die here, far from the sun and sky they loved. "What should we say?" asked someone from the crowd. Joran looked around at the frightened faces, at the children clinging to their parents, at the elderly who had seen their world's golden age turn to ash. "We tell them the truth," he said simply. "We are dying. Our children cry out in the darkness. If there is mercy left in the universe, please help us." The message went out into space, traveling faster than light through special channels the Karani had built long ago. It reached the Galactic Council first, that great gathering of advanced races who claimed to keep peace among the stars. The council discussed the message for exactly 7 minutes. The Althari representative spoke for most of them when she said, "The Devourers are too dangerous. We cannot risk our own worlds for one small planet. We vote to quarantine the sector." The Zephyrian ambassador agreed. "It is unfortunate, but the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Velara must be sacrificed." One by one, the great civilizations of the galaxy turned away. The hegemony of suns, the Crystal Empire, the Federation of Peaceful Worlds. All of them had the power to help, but none wanted to risk their own safety. They had grown comfortable in their peace, fat and lazy in their prosperity. The idea of real danger, real sacrifice, was something they had forgotten how to face. The message reached other worlds too. The proud warrior clans of Zirian heard it and laughed. "Let the weak perish," they said. "It is the natural way." The philosophical dreamers of Astral heard it and sighed sadly, but they were pacifists who would not fight even to save lives. The machine intelligences calculated the odds of success and found them too low to be worth the effort. Across the galaxy, the cry for help was heard by 1,000 different species. None of them answered. But in a small blue world at the edge of civilized space, something different happened. The message reached Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station, Omega at 14:32 Universal Time, Lieutenant Sarah. Kim was drinking coffee and reading reports when the signal came through her speakers. She almost deleted it. They got thousands of random transmissions every day, most of them just cosmic noise or automated beacons. But something in the voice made her stop. The pain was real. The fear was real. She played it again and again, running it through the translation computers. "Sir," she called to her supervisor, Commander Jack Torres. "You need to hear this." Torres listened to the message 3 times. His face grew darker with each replay. "They're asking for military help," he said finally. "Yes, sir." "Against something called Devourers. The computer analysis says they're some kind of hive mind species that destroys entire worlds." Torres was quiet for a long moment. He thought about his own daughter, safe at home on Earth. He imagined her trapped underground, scared and hungry, while monsters destroyed everything above. "Send this up the chain," he ordered. "All the way to the top. Priority Alpha." The message reached the Pentagon in 20 minutes. It was on the president's desk in an hour. By evening, every major world leader had heard the plea from Velara. The response was immediate and unanimous. Humanity would help. While the great powers of the galaxy debated and calculated and made excuses, Earth moved with the speed of a species that understood what war really meant. Admiral Sarah Chen was given command of every ship humanity could spare. The order was simple: save Velara, whatever the cost. The Galactic Council watched in amazement as the human fleet gathered. Ships that looked crude compared to their elegant vessels, crude by a species most of the galaxy considered barely civilized. The humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. They were newcomers, primitives, hardly worth noticing. They cannot succeed where we would fail, the Council assured themselves. They will die with the others. But as the human ships prepared to jump to hyperspace, intercepted communications revealed something that made the more advanced species pause. The humans were not just sending soldiers. They were sending specialists in something the galaxy had tried to forget: the ancient art of total war. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, looking out at the fleet assembled around her. 200 ships of every size and type, from massive battleships to small fast destroyers. Each one carried weapons the galaxy would consider barbaric, tactics they would call monstrous. "Ma'am," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving protests from 17 different governments. They say our planned actions violate galactic law." Chen smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "Tell them galactic law failed to save Velara. We'll try something else." She opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. In 2 hours, we jump to a system where children are dying while the galaxy does nothing. They called out to the stars for help, and we're going to answer. I won't lie to you. What we're about to do will make us monsters in the eyes of other species. But sometimes the universe needs monsters to fight other monsters." The jump to hyperspace lit up the darkness around Earth. As the human fleet disappeared into the void, heading toward a desperate battle against an enemy that had conquered dozens of worlds, the galaxy watched and wondered if they had been wrong about which species was truly dangerous. On Velara, deep in her underground shelter, little Mira looked up at her mother. "Mama, do you think anyone hurt us?" Kayla held her daughter close, not knowing that help was already coming. Help that would save them all. But at a price the galaxy was not prepared to pay. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Velara system like a pack of hungry wolves. Admiral Chen stood on her bridge, watching the tactical display as her ships spread out in attack formation. What she saw made her stomach turn. Velara was dying. The once blue planet was now a sickly brown color, covered in what looked like black veins spreading across its surface. Massive creatures the size of cities moved across the continents, stripping away everything in their path. In orbit, thousands of smaller devourer ships buzzed around the planet like flies around rotting meat. "My God," whispered her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. "How many of them are there?" Chen's sensors counted over 10,000 enemy contacts, ranging from fighter-size to massive ships that dwarfed even Earth's largest battleships. Any sane military commander would have ordered an immediate retreat. The odds were impossible, but humans had never been particularly sane. "All ships, battle stations," Chen ordered. "Deploy assault formations Charlie through Hotel. Activate jamming protocols. And remember, we're not here to fight fair. We're here to win." The Galactic Council monitoring stations picked up the human communications and recoiled in shock. The tactical chatter they intercepted spoke of weapons and strategies that violated every civilized rule of warfare. Requesting permission to deploy chemical payloads, came one transmission. Authorized. Target their breeding centers first. "Ma'am, should we attempt to capture prisoners for intelligence?" "Negative. No prisoners. These things don't negotiate." On the Council observation ship Harmony's Light, Ambassador Veltar of the Crystal Empire listened to the transmissions with growing horror. "They speak of warfare like barbarians," she said to her aide. Her aide, a young Althari named Quinks, pulled up human military records on his console. "Ambassador, their history shows they have fought wars continuously for their entire recorded civilization. They have weapons we have never seen, tactics we have never considered." Velara watched as the human fleet began its assault. The ships moved like nothing in civilized space, not in neat formations but in chaotic, unpredictable patterns that seemed random but were clearly coordinated. They used the asteroids and debris in the system for cover, striking from unexpected angles. They fight like predators, she realized with a chill. Captain Marcus Torres commanded the assault ship Unbreakable, leading the first wave of human marines toward the planet's surface. His troops were different from any soldiers the galaxy had seen. They carried weapons designed for close combat, wore armor meant to intimidate as much as protect, and had trained for exactly this kind of nightmare scenario. Listen up. Marines, Torres announced over the ship's communications. Intel says the bugs have taken most of the surface, but there are still civilians alive in underground shelters. Our job is simple: kill every devourer we find and get those people out alive. Sergeant Maria Santos checked her flamethrower one last time. She had volunteered for this mission because she had children of her own back on Earth. The thought of them trapped and helpless while monsters destroyed their world made her blood boil with protective fury. "Sir," asked Corporal Johnson, "what about the Galactic Warfare Conventions? Aren't flamethrowers considered cruel?" Torres looked at him with cold eyes. "Son, when someone threatens children, I don't give a damn about conventions." The first human landing ships hit Velara's surface like meteors, crashing through the atmosphere protected by shields that glowed white-hot. They landed in the middle of Devourer-controlled territory, exactly where any sensible military would avoid. The Devourers had never faced anything like humans. For centuries, they had conquered civilized species who fought with clean, efficient energy weapons and followed rules of engagement. The humans brought fire, explosives, and a willingness to get their hands dirty that shocked the hive mind. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked in the medical bay of the command ship. But she was not treating wounded soldiers. She was creating weapons that no civilized species would consider. Her laboratory was filled with biological samples taken from captured devourer specimens, and she was developing targeted toxins that would attack their nervous systems. "Doctor," her assistant protested, "this violates the Biological Weapons Treaty of 2387. Vasquez looked up from her work, her eyes hard. "Earth never signed that treaty, and even if we had, I would break it to save those children down there." In the computer core of the fleet's command ship, Lieutenant Zhang Wei and his team of cyber warfare specialists were doing something the galaxy had never seen before. They were hacking the Devourer hive mind. The alien network was vast and complex, but it had one weakness: it had never evolved to defend against attack. For millions of years, the Devourers had been the predators, never the prey. Their communications were open, trusting, vulnerable. "I'm in," Zhang announced to his team. "Their entire neural network is exposed. We can plant viruses, false information, even feedback loops that will cause physical pain." His supervisor, Major Kim, grinned savagely. "Do it. Make them hurt." On the surface of Velara, the first human marines encountered Devourers in the ruins of what had once been a beautiful city. The aliens were massive, insect-like creatures with razor-sharp claws and acid that could melt metal. They attacked in swarms, overwhelming their enemies with sheer numbers. But humans had been fighting swarms for thousands of years. They knew how to funnel enemies into kill zones, how to use fire and explosives to break up formations, how to turn the environment itself into a weapon. Sergeant Santos led her squad through the ruins. Following the sounds of Kirani civilians trapped below, her motion detector showed dozens of Devourers between them and the shelter entrance. "Jensen, Morrison, set charges on those support pillars," she ordered. "We're going to bring the whole block down on them." "Sergeant, that will destroy everything in a 6-block radius," Morrison protested. "Good. Let them have nothing but rubble." The explosion shook the ground for miles around. When the dust settled, the Devourers in that area were buried under tons of concrete and steel. It was brutal, destructive, and completely effective. Colonel James Okafor watched the battle from his command post and made a decision that would haunt the galaxy's nightmares for centuries to come. He activated Protocol Nightmare, a psychological warfare program designed to exploit the one weakness humanity had identified in the Devourer hive mind. "All units, begin isolation protocols," he ordered. "Jam their communications. Cut them off from each other. Make them face the one thing they've never had to face: being alone." Across the battlefield, human jammers began broadcasting on frequencies that disrupted Devourer neural links. For the first time in millions of years, individual devourers found themselves cut off from the collective consciousness that had defined their existence. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Devourers began to panic, running in circles, attacking each other, or simply freezing in place as their minds struggled to cope with isolation. The mighty hive mind that had conquered dozens of worlds was brought low by something as simple as loneliness. The Galactic Council watched in stunned silence as Earth's forces systematically dismantled an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. The humans fought with a savagery that shocked civilized sensibilities, but they were winning. "They are monsters," Ambassador Veltar whispered, watching human soldiers use weapons that had been banned for centuries. But even as she spoke, she saw human medics risking their lives to rescue Karani civilians, saw soldiers sharing their food with alien children, saw engineers working to restore the planet's poisoned water supplies. The galaxy was learning a hard truth. Sometimes it took monsters to fight monsters, and sometimes the monsters were the only ones brave enough to do what needed to be done. As the first day of battle ended, Admiral Chen looked at the tactical reports with grim satisfaction. They had lost 12 ships and over 300 Marines, but they had saved 4 million Karani civilians and cleared nearly a quarter of the planet's surface. "Ma'am," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender offers from 17 different devourer clusters." Chen's expression was stone cold. No surrender. No prisoners. These things destroyed entire worlds. Today we return the favor. The galaxy watched in horrified fascination as humanity showed them what total war really meant. The tunnels beneath Velthara's surface had become a maze of death and horror. Captain Marcus Torres led his Marines through passages that dripped with alien slime, following the heat signatures of trapped Karani civilians. Behind them, the tunnels burned with the chemical fire of human flamethrowers. The devourers had built their hive networks deep underground, thinking themselves safe from orbital bombardment. They had not counted on humans being willing to follow them into the dark places and fight them hand to hand. "Movement ahead," whispered Sergeant Santos, her thermal scope picking up the heat signatures of approaching enemies. "Big ones." Torres looked at his tactical display. 50 devourers were moving toward them through the main tunnel, while smaller groups flanked them from side passages. In any civilized military, this would be the time to call for reinforcement and wait for support. Torres was not civilized military. "Santos, take your squad left. Johnson, go right. We'll hit them from 3 sides at once. And remember, these things eat children. Show no mercy." The battle in the tunnels was unlike anything in galactic military history. Humans fought with weapons banned by every civilized treaty. Flame units that turned entire passages into infernos, explosive charges that brought down tunnel systems, and toxic gases that melted devourer carapaces from the inside. But more than their weapons, it was their attitude that shocked the monitoring galaxy. Human soldiers fought with a personal hatred that went beyond duty or orders. They fought like parents protecting their children, like wolves defending their pack. Sergeant Santos cornered a wounded devourer in a side chamber and stood over it with her flamethrower ready. The creature tried to communicate, sending distress signals through its neural implants. "Please," the translation came through her helmet speakers. "Mercy, we only follow nature. We consume to survive." Santos thought of the Karani children she had seen pictures of. Small, innocent beings who had never hurt anyone. "You chose the wrong planet to get hungry on," she said, and pulled the trigger. Above ground, Dr. Elena Vasquez had moved her laboratory to a captured devourer facility. She worked surrounded by the corpses of alien creatures, developing biological weapons with a scientific precision that would have impressed and horrified any xenobiologist in the galaxy. "The toxin is ready," she announced to Admiral Chen over the communications link. "It targets their respiratory system specifically. 1 dose in their atmosphere processors will poison an entire hive cluster." "Is it painful?" Chen asked. "Extremely. They will suffocate slowly over several hours." "Good. Deploy it to all Marine units immediately." In the galaxy's monitoring stations, Ambassador Veltar listened to this exchange with growing nausea. "They speak of torture as if it were routine military procedure," she told her aide. Her aide, Quinks, had been studying human history files all day. His face was pale as he read, "Ambassador, humans have been doing this to each other for thousands of years. They call it war." "They are, Very good at it. Lieutenant Jiang Wei had established his cyber warfare center in orbit around Velara, his computers linked directly to the planet's information networks. What he was doing to the Devourer hive mind was beyond anything the galaxy had imagined possible. "I've uploaded the fear virus into their neural network," he reported to his team. "Every Devourer on the planet is now experiencing human phobias: claustrophobia, arachnophobia, fear of drowning. They don't understand what's happening to them." His specialist, Corporal Park, looked up from her console with a vicious smile. "The panic virus is ready for deployment. It will make them feel like they're being hunted by something they can't see or understand. Upload it," Jiang ordered. "Let them know what fear feels like." Across Velthara's surface, Devourers began experiencing emotions they had never felt in millions of years of existence. The hive mind that had conquered countless worlds was being destroyed not by superior technology, but by the simple human understanding of how to break another creature's spirit. Colonel James Okafor watched the psychological warfare reports with satisfaction. The Devourers were beginning to turn on each other, their perfect unity fractured by artificially induced paranoia and fear. "Sir," his aide reported, "we're detecting mass evacuations from 17 hive clusters. They're abandoning positions they've held for months." "Excellent. Deploy pursuit teams. Don't let any of them escape to space." The space battle above Velthara had turned into a one-sided slaughter. Human ships used tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare: ramming attacks, suicide runs, and weapons that targeted enemy life support systems rather than just disabling ships. Commander Lisa Park piloted her destroyer Retribution through a cloud of Devourer fighters, her ship's hull scarred by acid burns and impact damage. Her tactical officer was dead. Half her crew was wounded, but she pressed the attack with relentless fury. "Ma'am, we've lost main weapons," her engineer reported. "Hull breach on deck 3. Seal the breach and prepare for ramming speed," Park ordered. "If we're going down, we're taking some of them with us." But Park's ship was not alone. Admiral Chen had learned from centuries of human naval warfare. Ships worked in packs, supporting each other, covering each other's weaknesses. As the Retribution lined up for its final attack, 3 other human ships moved to protect her flanks. The Galactic Council watched as human vessels destroyed themselves to save their companions, showing a loyalty and self-sacrifice that their advanced civilizations had forgotten how to feel. On the surface, the tide of battle had turned completely. Devourer hive clusters that had seemed unbreakable were collapsing under human assault. The aliens had never faced an enemy that was willing to use every possible weapon, no matter how cruel or destructive. Captain Torres and his Marines reached the Karani shelter just as the last Devourer defenders were retreating. The underground complex was filled with thousands of frightened civilians who had been trapped for months. Kayla and her daughter Mira were among the first to see human soldiers. The sight was terrifying. These beings were covered in alien blood, carrying weapons that still smoked from recent use, their faces hidden behind fearsome battle masks. But when Torres removed his helmet, Mira saw something that surprised her. The human had kind eyes, and when he smiled at her, she felt safe for the first time in months. "Hello, little one," Torres said through his translator. "We're here to take you home." The evacuation of Karani civilians became a massive operation involving every human ship in the system. Medical teams treated wounded aliens with the same care they would give to human patients. Engineers worked to restore power and life support to damaged shelters. It was this contradiction that puzzled the watching galaxy most of all. The same humans who had used chemical weapons against Devourers were now sharing their food with alien children. The soldiers who had shown no mercy to their enemies were gentle and protective with the innocent. Dr. Vasquez worked in a field hospital treating both human wounded and Karani civilians. She moved between beds where her biological weapons had poisoned Devourers to beds where she was saving Karani lives with the same scientific skill. "Doctor?" asked a young Karani medic. "How can you create such terrible weapons and then heal with the same hands?" Vasquez looked at him with tired eyes. "Because sometimes the only way to protect innocent life is to destroy those who would take it away." As the 3rd day of battle ended, Admiral Chen received a report that filled her with grim satisfaction. The Devourer presence on Velthara had been reduced by 80%. The remaining aliens were trapped in isolated pockets, cut off from their hive mind and slowly dying from human biological weapons. But the cost had been terrible. Over 1,000 human soldiers were dead, and many more were wounded. Entire sections of Velthara's surface had been rendered uninhabitable by the weapons needed to cleanse them of devourer infestation. "Ma'am," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving protests from the Galactic Council. They say our methods violate 47 different treaties and conventions." Chen looked out at the scarred planet below, thinking of the millions of Karani children who would live to see another day because her people had been willing to do terrible things. "Send a message to the Council," she said. "Tell them that when they were debating treaties, children were dying. When they were worried about conventions, worlds were burning. We did what needed to be done." The message reached every monitoring station in the galaxy, and with it came a new understanding. Humanity was not just another species seeking its place among the stars. They were something different, something dangerous and necessary. As night fell over Velthara, human soldiers stood guard over Karani shelters while medical teams worked to save lives. In the darkness between the stars, other devourer fleets received the news of their defeat and made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. For the first time in their species' history, the devourers were afraid. 6 weeks after the last devourer died on Velthara, Ambassador Zara al-Rashid arrived to survey what humanity had wrought. Her diplomatic shuttle passed over landscapes that told the story of total war. Craters where human orbital bombardments had eliminated hive clusters, forests turned to ash by chemical weapons, rivers still running red with alien blood. But she also saw something else. In the cleared areas, Karani families were returning to the surface. Human engineers worked alongside local workers to rebuild homes and schools. Medical stations flew both Earth and Velthara flags, treating anyone who needed help. The contradiction was stunning. The same species that had unleashed weapons of mass destruction was now sharing their technology freely to heal the world they had helped devastate. Al-Rashid's shuttle landed at the main human base, where Admiral Chen waited to greet her. The Admiral looked older than she had in the pre-battle photos, her hair streaked with gray that had not been there 2 months ago. "Ambassador," Chen said, offering a tired smile. "Welcome to Velthara. I hope you had a pleasant journey." "Admiral Chen," Al-Rashid replied carefully, "I've come to discuss the Galactic Council's concerns about human military conduct during this operation." Chen's smile faded. "Of course you have. Would you like to meet some of the people we saved before we discuss what rules we broke?" They walked through the refugee camps first. Thousands of Karani families lived in temporary shelters while their world was slowly restored. Human soldiers distributed food and medicine, played games with alien children, and helped elderly Karani tend small gardens they had planted in the hope of seeing their world green again. Little Mira ran up to Al-Rashid, her small hands dirty from playing in the soil. "Are you here to thank the humans too?" she asked innocently. "They saved us from the bad monsters." Al-Rashid looked down at the child, then at the human medic who was teaching Karani children how to plant seeds. "Something like that," she said quietly. At the War Crimes Tribunal that the Galactic Council had insisted on holding, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before a panel of judges from 12 different species. Her biological weapons had killed over 2 million devourers in ways that violated every treaty on humane warfare. "Dr. Vasquez," said Judge Korath of the Zephyrian High Court, "you stand accused of developing and deploying weapons of mass biological destruction. How do you plead?" Vasquez looked at the judges with steady eyes. "I plead guilty, Your Honor. I created weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering to devourer forces. Do you show any remorse for your actions?" Vasquez glanced toward the visitor gallery, where Kayla sat holding her daughter Mira. "Every Karani child alive today exists because I was willing to become a monster so they didn't have to. If that makes me a war criminal, then I accept that title with pride." Judge Korath leaned forward. "You seem to believe that the ends justify the means. I believe that when someone threatens children, you use whatever weapons you have to stop them. The devourers were not interested in surrender or negotiation. They were a cancer that needed to be cut out completely." The tribunal recessed for deliberation, but everyone knew the verdict was already decided. The Galactic Council needed someone to blame for the horror they had witnessed, and Dr. Vasquez had volunteered to be their scapegoat. Captain Marcus Torres faced his own tribunal for violations of the Prisoner Treatment Convention. The charges included refusing to accept surrender, using excessive force against disabled enemies, and deploying chemical weapons in urban areas. Captain Torres asked Judge Veltar of the Crystal Empire, "Did you at any point during the campaign attempt to minimize civilian casualties?" Torres looked at her with barely controlled anger. "Ma'am, every action we took was designed to save civilian lives. The only civilians on Velthara were Karani. The Devourers were invaders who had already consumed dozens of worlds. But you used weapons banned by civilized warfare." "Civilized warfare?" Torres laughed bitterly. "Your Honor, there is nothing civilized about war. There is only winning and losing, living and dying. We chose to let the Karani live, which meant the Devourers had to die. In the end, the tribunal convicted 18 human officers of various war crimes. The sentences ranged from formal censure to exile from civilized space. None of the humans seemed particularly concerned about their punishment. Admiral Chen received the harshest sentence: permanent exile from Galactic Council space and a formal declaration that she was persona non grata in all civilized systems. When Judge Korath read the verdict, Chen's response shocked the courtroom. "Thank you, Your Honor. That will make it much easier for us to do our job." "Your job?" "Protecting people who can't protect themselves from things that civilized folk are too squeamish to fight." The real shock came when the Karani government formally requested that all convicted humans be pardoned and invited to remain on Velthara as permanent residents. Elder Joran, speaking for his people, addressed the tribunal with words that would be remembered across the galaxy. "These humans came to our world when no one else would help. They fought monsters that your great civilizations were afraid to face. Yes, they used terrible weapons and fought in ways that violated your laws. But they saved our children, and that is all that matters to us." The Galactic Council found itself in an impossible position. They could not pardon war criminals without destroying their own authority, but they could not punish the saviors of an entire world without looking like hypocrites. In the end, they chose a middle path that satisfied no one. The human conviction stood, but enforcement was left to individual member worlds. Since Velthara chose not to enforce them, the humans remained free. But the damage to galactic unity was severe. 3 smaller civilizations formally protested the Council's handling of the situation. The peaceful Confederation of Rim Worlds actually left the Council entirely, stating that any organization that punished those who saved innocent lives was not worth belonging to. More disturbing were the requests that began arriving at human diplomatic stations. The Merchants Guild of Altara wanted to hire human security forces to protect their trade routes from pirates. The agricultural worlds of the Seban cluster asked for human advisors to help them defend against raiders. Within a month of the Velthara trials, humanity had received over 50 requests for military assistance from worlds that the Galactic Council had failed to protect. Admiral Chen stood in her new office on Velthara, looking out at the city that was slowly rising from the ashes of war. Karani and human engineers worked side by side, building something new from the ruins of the old. "Ma'am," her aide reported, "we've received another distress call. The mining colony on Zerion Prime is under attack by slavers. They're requesting immediate assistance." Chen looked at the report, thinking of human soldiers who had already given so much, who might be asked to give even more. "What does the Galactic Council say?" "They've declared it an internal matter and refused to intervene." Chen nodded slowly. "Prep the fleet. We deploy in 6 hours. Ma'am, we'll be operating outside Council space. If we're caught, there will be no legal protection." Chen smiled grimly. "Since when have we ever needed legal protection to do the right thing?" As news of the human response spread, something unprecedented happened across the galaxy. Other species began to volunteer for human military units. Altari pilots who were tired of being helpless. Zephyrian engineers who wanted to build something other than monuments to peace. Even former council soldiers who had been disgusted by their government's inaction. The humans accepted them all, with one simple requirement. They had to be willing to do whatever was necessary to protect innocent life. Regardless of what laws said about it, Dr. Vasquez established the first integrated medical research facility on Velthara, where human and alien scientists worked together to develop new ways to save lives. Her biological weapons research was classified, but everyone knew she was still working on ways to stop the next threat that might emerge from the darkness between stars. Lieutenant Zhang Wei founded the Terran Cyber Defense Corps, training specialists from a dozen species in the dark arts of electronic warfare. His motto was simple: fight fire with fire and monsters with monsters. As the first year after Velara ended, the galaxy had changed. The old order of civilized warfare and diplomatic solutions was cracking. In its place, something new was emerging. A loose confederation of worlds and species united not by treaties or trade agreements, but by a simple understanding. Sometimes, the universe needed monsters to fight monsters, and humanity had volunteered to be those monsters, whatever the cost to their reputation or their souls. The Galactic Council could condemn them, exile them, even hunt them if they chose. But as long as there were innocents who needed protection, the monsters of Earth would be there, standing guard in the darkness between the stars. 2 years after Velara, the galaxy was a different place. Trade routes that had been terrorized by pirates for decades were now safe under human protection. Worlds that had been abandoned to raiders and slavers were rebuilding with human help. The great civilizations watched from their safe, comfortable systems as the monsters of Earth did the dirty work they were too civilized to do themselves. Secretary General Amara Osi stood before the assembled Galactic Council in their crystal palace on Centaurus Prime. She was the first human to address the full council since the Velara incident, and the tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Honorable representatives," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast hall. "I come before you today with an offer of partnership and cooperation." Ambassador Velara of the Crystal Empire leaned forward in her seat. "Partnership? After your species has violated our laws and terrorized peaceful systems across the galaxy?" Ose smiled coldly. "Peaceful systems? Tell me, Ambassador, how peaceful were the mining colonies of Xerion Prime when the Bloodclaw pirates were selling their children into slavery? How peaceful was the research station on Delta Eridani when the Fleshrender cult was using the scientists for ritual sacrifice? Those were isolated incidents," protested Judge Korath of the Zephyrian High Court. "The proper authorities were investigating." "Investigating?" Osi pulled up a holographic display showing recent news reports. "The Bloodclaws operated for 18 months while your authorities investigated. In that time, they enslaved over 30,000 people. It took my Marines 3 days to eliminate them completely." The council chamber erupted in angry voices. Some representatives protested human brutality, while others quietly admitted that the results spoke for themselves. Through it all, Ose stood calm and unmoved. "You came here with an offer," said High Counselor Marin of the Federation of Peaceful Worlds. "What exactly are you proposing?" Ose activated another display, this one showing a detailed organizational chart. The Terran Guardian Corps, a military organization dedicated to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. "We operate outside galactic law because galactic law has failed to protect the innocent. You want us to sanction your vigilante activities?" Ambassador Velara asked incredulously. "I want you to stop pretending that civilization can exist without someone willing to get their hands dirty. You can keep your clean consciences and your pretty treaties. We'll handle the monsters." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some council members wanted to declare humanity an outlaw species and mobilize their fleets against them. Others argued that human methods, while brutal, were undeniably effective. In the end, High Counselor Marin proposed a compromise that satisfied no one but was accepted by everyone. "The Galactic Council will neither endorse nor condemn human military activities outside our jurisdiction. Individual member worlds may request or refuse human assistance as they see fit." It was diplomatic language for, "We'll look the other way as long as you don't embarrass us." Ose accepted the decision with grace. "Thank you, counselors. I understand your position. You want the benefits of peace without accepting the cost of maintaining it. We're willing to pay that cost for you." As she left the council chamber, Ose passed a group of young representatives from various worlds. One of them, a Karani diplomat named Joran Ka, named after the elder who had saved his people, stopped her. "Secretary General," he said quietly, "many of us understand what your people have sacrificed. The official record may condemn you, but the survivors will always remember." Ose smiled sadly. "That's all we've ever asked for. On Earth, the transformation was complete. What had once been humanity's homeworld was now the headquarters of something unprecedented in galactic history. A military organization dedicated not to conquest or empire building, but to protecting those who could not protect themselves. Admiral Chen, now director of the Terran Guardian Corps, stood in the new command center overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Holographic displays showed Guardian operations across the galaxy, medical missions on plague-stricken worlds, evacuation efforts from natural disasters, and combat operations against threats too dangerous for civilized forces to handle. "Ma'am," her aide reported, "we've received a priority distress call from the Andorian system. A new threat has emerged, something calling itself the Void Swarm. They've already consumed 3 planets." Chen studied the tactical reports with growing concern. The Void Swarm was different from the Devourers, faster, more intelligent, and apparently immune to most conventional weapons. Worse, they seemed to specifically target populated worlds, as if they fed on sentient life itself. "What's the Council's response?" she asked. "They've declared the Andorian system a quarantine zone and are debating whether to send a research expedition." Chen closed her eyes and thought of the millions of people in the Andorian system, waiting for help that might never come.
"Prep the fleet."
"Full deployment, and tell Dr. Vasquez to bring her nastiest toys." 3 hours later, the largest human fleet ever assembled departed Earth's orbit. 200 ships carrying the best-trained, most ruthlessly effective military force in the galaxy. They were going to face an enemy that had already proven too dangerous for civilized forces to handle. On Velara, now the Guardian Corps' forward base in the Outer Rim, Captain Torres watched the fleet depart on his tactical display. His own ship, the Unbreakable, was among them. Around him, his Marines prepared for another deployment against impossible odds. "Sir," asked Sergeant Santos, now promoted to lieutenant, "why do we keep doing this? The galaxy hates us. They call us monsters and war criminals." Torres looked at a photo on his desk, a picture of him with a group of Karani children, taken during the reconstruction efforts. "Because someone has to, and we're the only ones willing to do what needs to be done." Dr. Vasquez worked in her laboratory aboard the research vessel Discovery, developing new weapons for the fight against the Void Swarm. Her biological warfare techniques had evolved far beyond what she had used against the Devourers. Now she could create targeted plagues that would attack specific genetic markers, toxins that could shut down alien nervous systems, and viral weapons that turned the enemy's own biology against them. She was, by any civilized standard, a monster. She had personally developed weapons that had killed millions of sentient beings in the most horrible ways imaginable, but every time she felt guilt about her work, she remembered the faces of the children she had helped save. Lieutenant Zhang Wei commanded the Cyber Warfare Division from the battlecruiser Retribution. His techniques had grown more sophisticated too. He could now hack into any known form of alien technology, turn enemy weapons against their makers, and create artificial intelligence viruses that could destroy entire computer networks. The Guardian Corps had attracted volunteers from across the galaxy, species that had grown tired of being helpless, individuals who had lost everything to threats that civilized forces couldn't or wouldn't stop. They came to Earth seeking training in the art of necessary evil. The Corps trained them all, but with one absolute requirement: they had to be willing to sacrifice their own humanity to protect others. It was not a burden they placed on anyone lightly. As the human fleet approached the Andorian system, they found a scene of devastation that surpassed even what the Devourers had accomplished. Entire worlds had been stripped not just of life, but of all organic matter. The Void Swarm had left behind planets that were nothing but lifeless rock floating in space. "My God," whispered Commander Park from her ship's bridge, "how do we fight something that can do this?" Admiral Chen's voice came over the fleet communications with steady determination. "The same way we fight everything else. With everything we have and everything we're willing to become." The battle for the Andorian system would become legend throughout the galaxy. For the first time since Velara, human forces faced an enemy that matched their ferocity and exceeded their destructive capability. The Void Swarm was everything the Devourers had been and more: faster, smarter, and utterly without mercy. But humanity had learned from every battle, adapted every weapon, and refined every tactic. They fought the Void Swarm with biological weapons that turned the aliens' own hunger against them, cyber attacks that drove them insane with artificial emotions, and psychological warfare that exploited fears the creatures didn't even know they had. The cost was terrible. Nearly half the Guardian Corps fleet was destroyed, and thousands of the galaxy's best soldiers died in the dark between the stars. But when the last Void Swarm ship was destroyed, 8 billion people in the Andorian system were still alive. The galaxy watched the aftermath with a mixture of awe and horror. The humans had once again done the impossible, saved lives that everyone else had written off as lost. But the methods they had used would give civilized beings nightmares for generations. 3 months after Andoria, Secretary General Ose received a private communication from High Counselor Marin of the Federation of Peaceful Worlds. The message was brief and unofficial, but its meaning was clear. The Council has voted to establish a memorial fund for families of Guardian Corps casualties. It will be listed in our records as disaster relief, but we know what it really is. Thank you for doing what we cannot.